Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today, we're heading to Delta, Ohio, 2016, and a 20-year-old named Sierra Joen goes missing.
It's one of those cases where, those tiny little details, they become like these really crucial clues.
Yeah, and we've got a ton of material to go through: police interviews, investigation findings.
And what's really eerie about this case is how these small, insignificant things, they sort of build this really disturbing web of evidence.
Exactly, yeah. And, we're talking about hidden freezer,
Mm.
a suspect with a really unsettling past, and even connections to a similar abduction, but decades earlier.
Yeah, this case, it highlights how important that really detailed police work is, but also how, these crimes, they affect families, communities.
So where do we even begin with this? It's July 19th, 2016. Sierra's with her boyfriend, Josh Kolasinski. They're hanging out, and then she heads home. It's about an 8-mile bike ride.
Which tragically turned out to be her last.
Exactly. So some time passes. Sierra doesn't come home.
Yeah.
And Josh calls her family, and no one's heard from her since she left his place.
So naturally, police get involved, and a full-scale search is launched to try and find Sierra.
And that search leads them to a cornfield
Yeah.
along County Road 6, and they find her bike, just abandoned. But there's this really bizarre collection of items along with it.
Earbuds, fuses, men's sunglasses, and this is important, a motorcycle helmet, all just scattered around the bike.
Okay, so that raises some questions, right? Like,
Right.
what's the connection between all these things? Why are they there?
Yeah, and that helmet, that was like a huge red flag for investigators, especially because Sierra's boyfriend, Josh, he rode a motorcycle.
So Josh becomes a person of interest.
Oh, absolutely. The FBI, they were involved too, and they brought Josh in right away for questioning. And we actually have a clip from that first interview.
Wow, are you serious?
Yeah, never been released publicly before.
Let's hear it.
Okay.
So just listening to him, he seems really concerned. And his story seems to line up.
Yeah, it does. Josh's alibi checked out, and he even said that Sierra had been wearing earbuds that night, which, confirmed that those earbuds found at the scene, they were definitely hers.
So if Josh is in the clear, we're back at square one. Who took Sierra?
Exactly. That's the million-dollar question.
And what were they after?
Right. So the search continues. Volunteers, the sheriff's office, the FBI, everybody's working around the clock, going door to door, talking to people, hoping that someone, anyone, saw something, anything, that could lead them to Sierra.
You can just imagine how tense it was. Everyone hoping they'd find her safe.
And during that massive search, they end up on the property of a guy named James Worley, Jim Worley.
Okay, who's this Jim Worley?
Yeah.
And what's his connection to all of this?
Well, at first, he seemed like any other guy living in the area. He said he'd been out riding his motorcycle that same day that Sierra disappeared. But he said his bike kept stalling, so he had to push it most of the way.
Ugh, sounds frustrating.
And he says he never saw Sierra or anyone else who could have been involved.
So it seems like a dead end, right? Just a guy out on his bike having a rough day.
Right. But then Jim says something that immediately makes the investigators pay attention. He claims that he saw 2 bicycles in that same cornfield while he was out that night.
Hold on, 2 bicycles. But they only found Sierra's bike there.
Exactly. And that little detail, that was a big red flag for the investigators. Did someone come back to get their bike after Jim left? Or was there something more to this that they weren't getting?
That's super suspicious.
And it doesn't end there. Jim then says something even more shocking. He claims that the stuff they found at the scene, the helmet, the fuses, even a screwdriver, he claims they were all his.
He's just admitting to all of this.
It was a strange turn of events. This encounter with Jim, it suddenly seemed like it could break the case open.
It's almost like he wanted to get caught. Why else would he offer up this information so easily?
Well, you have to remember, at this point, they couldn't arrest him or search his property, not based on just, his strange behavior in these claims. They needed more. Solid evidence.
So they keep investigating. But I bet they kept a close eye on Jim Worley.
Oh, absolutely. They couldn't shake this feeling that he was connected to Sierra's disappearance. This seemingly normal guy with his sputtering motorcycle, he had become their prime suspect.
And we've only just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to this story.
So those investigators, they start digging into the evidence they got from that cornfield, and it's pretty disturbing. So disturbing, they feel they have to go back to Jim Worley's house.
So they're going back to confront him, trying to catch him in a lie.
That's right. They have all these questions, right? about his motorcycle route that night, the missing items he claimed were his. And Jim, well, he gets even more vague. He says he doesn't remember the exact route he took or when his bike broke down.
That's pretty classic, right? When someone avoids giving specifics. Gets all vague when it really matters.
And it gets even weirder. When they ask him about that motorcycle helmet found near Sierra's bike, he insists there was no blood on it. But then he mentions that he's been DNA swabbed before.
Wait, why would he even bring that up? It seems so random.
It's a classic example of a guilty conscience, slipping out.
Yeah.
He's trying to downplay his past, but he's accidentally admitting to having some kind of criminal record.
Wow, what a slip-up. So the investigators know he's done time, but they don't know the specifics yet.
Right, and that just adds another layer of mystery to this whole thing. Why is he so secretive about his past? What's he hiding?
Okay, so what do they do next? How do they handle this guy?
They decide to play it cool. They keep talking to him, trying to keep things calm, like it's just a casual chat. They knew that the more he talked, the more likely he was to mess up and say something that would give him away.
It's smart, almost like they're lulling him into a false sense of security.
Exactly. And it seemed to be working. Because out of nowhere, Jim, he just offers to let them search his property again.
He's inviting them to find something. What was he thinking?
Maybe he thought that if he seemed cooperative, he could control the situation. Maybe even steer them away from something important.
Like some reverse psychology.
You could say that.
Yeah.
But the investigators, they weren't falling for it. They decided, okay, let's take you up on that offer. Something about Jim's behavior, his eagerness to help, it just made their suspicions even stronger. They had a hunch that if they looked closely at his property, this time with his permission, they might find something they missed before.
And I'm guessing they were right. Didn't their search lead them to his barn?
It did, and that's where things take a really dark turn. Inside that barn, they find bags. Bags filled with women's lingerie.
Bags of lingerie. That's strange. What was he doing with all that?
Well, when they asked him about it, Jim's explanation, it wasn't very convincing. He said he kept them as gifts for women he dated.
Seriously, who keeps bags of lingerie in a barn as gifts? Doesn't make sense.
The investigators weren't buying it either. This discovery, his weird behavior, all those contradictory statements, it painted a pretty disturbing picture.
It's like all these little details, these random things, they were starting to connect. And they were forming a very disturbing pattern.
You're right. At this point, they're convinced Jim's hiding something awful, and they weren't going to leave until they found it. The search of the barn continued. And they found another chilling detail. They found a makeshift room built out of hay bales. And inside, there was a mattress.
That is just creepy. Makes you wonder what was going on in that hidden room.
They noticed these rake marks on the barn floor, like someone had tried to hide something recently disturbed.
Like a freshly dug grave.
And then they find something even more concerning. They find a freezer buried in the ground, in the back room of the barn.
A buried freezer. Why would anyone bury a freezer? It seems like he's trying to hide something.
And when they asked him about it, Jim, he gave them another excuse. He said it was for his marijuana.
So he's growing weed on top of everything else.
Yeah, but they weren't fooled. They brought in a CSI cadaver dog.
Hold on, what's a cadaver dog?
It's a dog trained to find human remains. And the dog, it alerted on that freezer. To make things even worse, the freezer smelled like ammonia. You know, that chemical they use to mask the smell of decomposition?
Oh, that's just awful. It sounds like everything was pointing to a terrible discovery.
It was a big turning point in the investigation. All the evidence, it was piling up. Jim's lies, they were falling apart.
He must have known it was over.
You'd think so. But Jim, he kept denying everything, denying he had anything to do with Sierra's disappearance. But the investigators, they had something else. They had security camera footage from the area.
Oh, wow. They had him on camera near the scene.
They did. The footage showed Jim's truck driving near where Sierra was abducted around the time she disappeared. Remember, he originally said he was only on his motorcycle that day.
So he was caught. What did he say about that?
Well, he changed his story. Again, he said he went back to the cornfield in his truck later that night to look for his helmet.
The helmet they found at the scene. The one he claimed was his.
Yep, that's the one. It was a desperate attempt to explain the footage, but it just made things worse for him. His story was falling apart. He was getting more and more erratic.
Like he was digging himself a deeper hole with every word he said.
He was trapped in his own lies. With the security footage, that buried freezer, the blood they found on his motorcycle handlebars, those bags of lingerie, the investigators, they finally had enough. They arrested Jim.
It's about time. What a relief. So they arrested him right there At his barn.
They did. They finally took Jim Worley into custody for the abduction of Sierra Jamin.
What a moment. It took a while, but I bet those investigators felt a sense of justice finally catching their guy.
It was a big win, but they knew it wasn't over. They still had to build a strong case against Jim. And most importantly, they wanted to find Sierra and bring her home.
Did they find her?
The search for Sierra went on for hours. It must have been agonizing for her family. And then they got the news.
Tell me what happened.
A few hours after they arrested Jim Worley, a search team, they found Sierra's remains. She was buried in a field, not far from his property.
That's so heartbreaking.
Finding her remains was crucial, though, and allowed them to do a forensic exam to find out what really happened to her.
This must have been awful.
It was. They found Sierra. She was bound. Her arms and legs were tied behind her back, and she had been gagged. Something had been shoved in her mouth.
Oh my God, that's terrible.
It was horrific. The medical examiner, he said that the gag, it was too big for her mouth and it suffocated her. She also had a cut on her forehead and a bruise on her leg, which meant there had been a struggle.
She must have been so scared.
And she was wearing a lacy white top, like the ones they found in Jim's collection, and an adult diaper.
That's monstrous.
The whole scene, it showed that this was planned. This wasn't just random. It was calculated and brutal.
So what happened next? Did Jim confess? Did they go to trial?
The evidence against Jim, it was overwhelming. But there was one thing that bothered everyone. Why did he seem so prepared? It's like he had a plan.
Yeah, that's what's so scary about this whole case. It wasn't just a crime of opportunity. It was like he orchestrated it.
That's a really good point. And that thought led the investigators to something truly terrifying about Jim Worley's past.
There's more. Can't believe this could get any worse.
Oh, it does. They were about to discover that Sierra's case, it wasn't a one-time thing. It was a repeat of something very dark in Jim Worley's past. So, yeah, a dark chapter. It turns out this wasn't Jim Worley's first run-in with the law, not even close. Back in 1990, there was this woman, Robin Gardner, and she had a really terrifying experience with him. It was really similar to what happened to Sierra.
Oh, wow, this is giving me chills. What happened to Robin?
Robin was riding her bike, and she was hit by a truck.
Hit by a truck?
A truck that, you guessed it, belonged to Jim Worley.
Oh, no.
At first, she thought it was an accident, but she quickly realized it wasn't.
It sounds like he used the same tactic to target both of them. What did he do to Robin?
Worley, he held a screwdriver to her throat, forced her into his truck. He even handcuffed her.
This is just like Sierra's case. It's the same pattern.
The similarities are really scary, but thankfully, Robbie's story has a different ending. She managed to escape, she fought back, got free, and ran. And she was lucky enough to flag down a motorcyclist who was passing by. They got her to safety.
What a nightmare. I'm so glad she got away. So what happened to Worley after Robin escaped?
He was arrested. They charged him with abduction and assault. But get this, even with all the evidence against him, he said he was innocent. He even said that Robin made the whole thing up.
Are you kidding? That's insane. He was trying to manipulate the system.
Yeah, it's what they do. Deny, deflect, blame the victim. It's classic. But the jury, they didn't buy it. They found him guilty, sentenced him to 3 to 10 years in prison.
It's about time. But wait, you said this case had echoes in the present. Did he even serve his full sentence?
That's the frustrating part. He only served 2 years of that sentence.
2 years? That's it for kidnapping and assault. That seems incredibly lenient.
It is. It's heartbreaking to think that he was released early only to hurt Sierra.
It makes you wonder if Sierra's abduction could have been prevented if Worley had served more time.
That's a question that haunts a lot of people involved in this case. And what's even more disturbing is that Robin's case, it might not be the only one connected to Jim Worley.
Wait, are you saying there might be other victims?
It's a scary thought. But in 1996, just a few years after Worley got out of prison, he became a suspect in another case. A woman named Claudia Tinsley disappeared.
Who was Claudia Tinsley? What happened?
Claudia was an adult entertainer. She just vanished. The investigators thought Worley might have been involved, but they couldn't find enough evidence to connect him to her disappearance.
So her case is still unsolved.
It is. And with Worley's history and what they found at his property, it's possible there could be other victims out there, other families still searching for answers.
That's a horrifying thought. So they found Sierra's remains. What happened next?
Well, they had Sierra's remains, all this evidence against him, so Jim Worley finally went to trial, March 2018.
That trial must have been so emotional. What happened?
The prosecution, they had a ton of evidence, DNA, security footage, the stuff from his barn, and of course the similarities to Robin Gardner's abduction.
Did he still say he was innocent, even with all that evidence?
He did. He kept saying he was innocent, but he couldn't explain any of the evidence.
It seems like he was in denial, couldn't accept what he had done. What did the jury say?
They found Jim Worley guilty on all counts. Assault, kidnapping, abduction, tampering with evidence, murder, everything.
Wow, he was convicted of a lot of crimes. What was his sentence?
He was sentenced to death.
So he's on death row.
He is. And while he's been in prison, he wrote this, 105-page manifesto.
A manifesto. What did he write about?
In it, he still claims he's innocent. He says the police set him up, that it's all a big conspiracy.
Wow. He's still trying to manipulate everyone.
It seems like it. But nobody believes him anymore, and his appeals have been denied. He's scheduled to be executed on May 20th, 2025.
Wow. What about Sierra's family? How are they doing after all of this?
They were relieved that justice was served, but their pain is unimaginable. They've been working really hard to try to prevent something like this from happening again. They've been pushing for a new law.
It's amazing that they could turn their grief into something positive. What is this law? What does it do?
It's called Sierra's Law. It's a violent offender registry in Ohio.
I've heard that. It's a really important law.
It is. It requires people convicted of violent crimes like kidnapping or assault to register with the police when they get out of prison. And that information is made public so people know if someone dangerous is living in their community.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
It's all about transparency and giving communities the power to protect themselves. It's a powerful way to honor Sierra's memory.
It really is. Sierra's mom, Sheila, she said she hopes this law will do some good, that something positive can come from her daughter's death.
It's hard to imagine having that kind of strength, to fight for change while going through such a terrible loss.
It's incredible. And Sheila also decided to demolish Worley's farmhouse.
Wow. That's a really strong statement.
Yeah. It was about erasing that awful place.
Yeah.
And reclaiming the space for healing.
This whole case has been so intense, so many emotions. What are some key things you think our listeners should remember?
Sierra's case shows us that evil can be anywhere. Even in places that seem safe and peaceful, we have to be vigilant, trust our instincts, and speak up if something seems wrong.
And we have to protect each other, support laws that keep our communities safe, and never forget the victims.
Absolutely. One last thought for everyone listening. What can we do as individuals and as communities? What can we do to prevent these tragedies from happening? How can we make the world safer so that young women like Sierra can ride their bikes home without being afraid?
That's a question we all need to think about. Thank you all for joining us for this incredibly tough but important deep dive. Justice was served, but the fight for safety and remembering Sierra, it goes on. Her legacy lives on in everyone who loved her and in the law that carries her name.